Rent-to-rent property investing as a strategy is one I get asked so many questions about, especially from people that are just starting out and brand new, probably when they realise you can make about £1,000 a month from a property that you don't even own. This is a strategy that I've been using for about 9 years, and in this video I want to break down exactly how it works. If you're watching my videos for the first time, my name is Saj Hussain, and on this channel I share with you my 15 years of property investing experience to ultimately help you get further faster in your own property investing journey. Rent to rent is a phenomenal strategy. There's many ways that you can do that, but first of all, let me just explain the basics of exactly how it works. The concept of rent to rent is really simple. There's a couple of different ways it can work, but the core one and the one that most people tend to use is rent to HMO. So let me explain what that means. You take a family house like this. Nice bit of artwork there. And in this house you have 4 bedrooms and say 3 reception rooms. What you're able to do is take those rooms and rent them out individually. So say you have 6 rooms that you rent out plus a communal lounge as well. So let's just draw that out here. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you're renting this property from the owner and you're paying £1,000 a month to the landlord to rent this whole property. Now you're renting these individual rooms out to these tenants here, and each one is paying you say £450. So your £450 times 6 gives you £2,700 a month. So now you're bringing in £2,700 a month, and you're paying out the landlord £1,000. Now, hey, look, it's not all profit. You've got some operational costs with that. You've got utilities you need to pay, gas, electric, water, council tax, maybe a bit of maintenance, some voids you need to allocate for as well. But let's say, for the purposes of example, you have £700 allocated towards your cost. So then you're left with £2,000. So from that £2,000, you're paying your landlord £1,000, and ultimately you're left with £1,000 profit from a property that you don't even own. Now, it doesn't take many of these before very quickly you're earning more from this than you would be in your day job. There's many reasons why people want to start with this particular strategy, and it's not just the fact that it makes a great amount of money every single month. You're also able to get started with not a huge amount of upfront capital, because effectively you're renting the properties. You're going to have some setup costs, which I'm going to talk about in a moment in more detail, but generally it's not a huge amount of money that you need to get started, because effectively you're controlling these properties rather than owning the properties. The other thing you're able to do is build your knowledge up in this industry quite quickly, because if you're purchasing a property, you're going to be putting an offer in. It could be a couple of months, 2-3 months before it's purchased. Then you're going to have it set up and then rent it out. And you know what you achieve in 6 months, say from a buy to let, you could probably do within a month in a rent to rent property. Now here's the thing with rent to rent. I'd always recommend you use this as a stepping stone strategy. So what that means is that you build up enough income to really be able to have the time back that you need to be able to focus on starting to acquire assets to build that long-term wealth. So this is a stepping stone strategy to get you the income to get moving forward into actually owning property. What I've been talking about just now is rent to HMO, where essentially we're taking a property from a landlord and we're increasing the amount of rent that we can get. Now, before I break down the 7 steps exactly how this works, what I want to do is explain a different way that you can also increase the amount of money that you get from rent to rent in property. With rent to rent, another way that you can increase the amount of income in the property is not by adding more people into the house, which is what we've been talking about earlier on, i.e. rent to HMO, but actually increase the amount of income that you generate over that month, i.e. per night. And sometimes people call this a short stay model or serviced accommodation or even the Airbnb model. And essentially here, what you're doing is you're taking a property on from a landlord, again, just like we were talking about before. But in this case, what you're doing is you're charging a higher rate per night. Let's say it's £100 a night you were charging, and let's say over a month of 30 days, you've got say £3,000 a month income now coming in. Now, of course, there'll be some nights where you won't have full occupancy, but generally the principle in terms of taking a property on for controlling is similar, but where these two strategies differ is one is you're putting more people into the room, i.e. rent to HMO. On the other one, you're having people pay a higher amount for staying for a shorter period of time. And that's the two core strategies people use in rent to rent, i.e. rent to HMO or rent to service accommodation. Let's now jump into the 7 steps in what you need to follow to get this strategy to work. When it comes to rent, there are so many people that get this wrong, and the reason they get it wrong is because they don't understand the fundamentals. These 7 steps that I'm going to share with you now are not only the ones that we use, but the ones I've taught literally thousands of people over the years to get this right. As I said, I started doing this about 9 years ago, and when I started, believe me, I didn't have a clue either in terms of what I was doing, but I quickly took the time and effort to learn exactly how to get it right, so that now you don't have to learn with trial and terror. Step 1 is understanding your operating environment. What do I mean about the operating environment? The operating environment is the location where we're going to be working and what the rules and regulations that apply to that particular sector. So for example, let's say you're going to do HMOs in Birmingham, you need to understand that for HMOs you need planning permission, you might need a license as well. There's certain other obligations you're going to have in terms of running these houses. So there's national rules and there's local rules as well to think about. The other thing that you also want to understand is who's the accommodation going to be for? Who's ultimately going to be living in that property, and what is it that you need to create that's going to be suitable for that type of tenant? And then of course, it's looking in the market to see who else already exists providing this type of accommodation. Essentially, who's your potential competitors and what kind of job are they doing? Are they doing a fantastic job, or are they really doing an appalling job that's going to make your life much easier because you just need to do a better job than them? Once you've understood your local operating environment in terms of what you're going to do and where you're going to do that, the next thing you're going to do is step number 2, which is crunching those numbers. By crunching numbers, what I mean is you need to look at when you're taking this property on from a landlord, what is it that you're going to be paying? What's the typical market rent for a 4-bedroom house or a 2-bedroom apartment? Whatever you're going to be taking on, what it is that you typically might be paying as rent to the landlord. Now, maybe you might negotiate something maybe a little bit less than that. It might even be paying something more than that. And we'll talk about that in a few moments. But understanding those numbers means that's your starting point. Then you'll have costs in terms of setting up the property and operating it as well. You've got to look at those costs and be realistic with those numbers in terms of what is it going to cost you to set up and operate that particular business. So ultimately you can work out, is it really going to be profitable? Now, you're not always necessarily going to hit £1,000 per property per month, but that's a nice number to aim for. Ultimately, it's a case of what you're happy with, how much you're happy to earn for the amount of effort you got to put in. Because let's be real here, there is work involved in getting this strategy working. It is not easy. You're not going to be sitting on a beach, sunning yourself and using a laptop and hey, presto, all the money's going to be rolling in. It requires effort for you to set up and build that business to make it work. So you've got to decide how much is it that you want to earn for all the effort that you're putting in. Hey, if you're enjoying this content, I'd like to ask for a favor, and that favor is not going to cost you a penny. And that's just to click on that subscribe button, because this way YouTube will share this content to more people just like you, and it would really help me out. Now let's get back to that video. The next step, number 3, is to actually go out and find these particular properties. Now that you've understood what you're looking for and where you're looking for, now it's actually finding these. Initially, we're still going to be doing desk research, because everything we've been talking about right now, most of it will be desk research, stuff that you can sit at your desk and do with your computer and your phone. And when we're doing some of the searching, we'll be using online portals, for example, and that's something we can still do at the desk. But then ultimately we have to get out and start looking at those properties, assessing them, get a feel for what's the quality of the property like, what's the location like, is it what you thought it was going to be, and is it going to work for what you ultimately want to do. Now there's 2 different ways that you can go out and find these properties. The one is the traditional on-market route. You go and find properties that have been advertised through letting agents, and you go and speak to them about what you want to do, and ultimately what you're proposing to them is some kind of guaranteed rent over a period of time with no gaps, no voids, which means that the owner of the property is not going to have any hassle. They're not going to have to deal with any problems on a day-to-day basis because you're taking care of that property. That's essentially your proposal to the owner of the property. Now it might be through a letting agent to put that message to them, or alternatively, the other way to do that is what we call direct to vendor, when we go looking for the owner of that particular property and having a direct conversation with them. If you want to learn more about how to find these type of properties, then make sure you watch this video afterwards, just up here, that will link up for you, where I go into this in a lot more detail. You've now found the property, you've negotiated a great deal. The next step is number 4, is getting those contracts set up. Now there's 2 different ways that you can actually set up these type of rent-to-rent arrangements. The first one is where you lease the property from the owner. This is traditionally what happens in the commercial world for shops, factories, warehouses, offices, where they're leased from the owner for a long period of time for the occupier to use for whatever use they're going to be using it for. And essentially the principle's the same. You take on a long lease on that property, a long rental agreement from the owner for you to be able to repurpose the property for the way that you're intending. Now, just to be completely clear, you are not hiding from the landlord what your intentions are, because you want them on board and work with you. The second type of contract, which is probably more common, is a management agreement. Now, with a management agreement, what you have is the ability to be able to manage that property to do what you want to do with it to effectively make the profit. The end result is still the same, but the process is different. So it's important that you've got the right kind of paperwork. The key thing here is if you sign a lease, you are effectively becoming the landlord of that property, and you are signing up those tenancies and the agreements for the people that are staying in that property. On the other hand, if you have a management agreement, then for all intents and purposes, you are now becoming a letting agent, and you need to deal with all the compliance side of that. If you want to learn more about the contracts and making sure you get the contracts right, then make sure you watch this video. We're going to link up here for you. At this point, you are now spending money. You'll be spending money potentially on deposits, some advance rent that you're paying on the property, and the property may even need some work doing. It might be a little bit of work that you need to do. It could be a lot more work that's required on that particular property. And there's also the furnishing side of it as well, because hey, let's face it, you're trying to make it a much nicer property than it may already be to attract those people that you want to stay in the property that are going to pay you the readies, because that's ultimately what it's about. But that's only going to happen if you get the numbers right. So it's important to understand what setup costs that you might have up front before you actually even get the keys, and for example your deposit and advance rent, and then what costs you're going to have to set up the property itself. So you've got costs before you get the keys, you've got costs once you've got the keys, and then you've got operating costs as well that you need to think about, and the kind of things we talked about earlier on, such as your gas, electric, water, council tax bills, TV license, internet, cleaners, gardeners, as well as maintenance and voids to think about. But ultimately, if you get this bit right, then you'll make money. I know what you might be thinking, hey Saj, that's just so many costs to think about. If you want to learn more about the costs in detail, then make sure you watch this video up here where I break down all the costs that you need to think about when you're setting up a rent to HMO property. Now that you've created this stunning and beautiful property, you've got to get some people to actually move into it and pay you some money. So you've got to make sure that you're out there marketing for the best possible tenants or guests that can be staying in that property. There's a number of different platforms that you can use for this, some fairly specialist ones. So for example, let's say it's working professionals that you're looking for, working tenants in a HMO, then it's probably the likes of spareroom.co.uk. Websites like that are probably the largest portals where you get the most number of people looking for rooms like that. And if it's short stay that you're looking at, it's probably airbnb.com that you'll be looking at in terms of people staying for a shorter period of time, a few days, a week, for that type of accommodation. One of the things I regularly get commented on that we do really well is not have so many problems with the people staying in our properties. What I mean by that is we're just exceptionally fussy about who we put into the property in the first place as a tenant or a guest, so that the whole business runs a lot more smoothly. And if you want to learn more about finding the best possible tenants, then make sure you watch this video that we're going to link up here for you. The last and final step, number 7, is being able to manage those properties in an effective way to ultimately stay profitable. Because so many people slip up at this bit because they take their eye off the ball once people start moving into it. They forget that they've actually got to look after those tenants, and they've got to look after the property to make sure the property is in top condition to be able to get those best possible rents. Because there's no purpose in you taking a property on from a landlord that might be struggling to rent that property for the money they're looking for because it's just a bit tired, and you're offering the same kind of thing to somebody else. You've got to make it much nicer, but you've got to keep on top of it to keep it nice and make sure you're looking after the property. And if you're doing rent to service accommodation, remember, you're in the hospitality business. That means you've got to look after your guests and take care of them to get those great reviews, to be able to get people keep coming back to those rooms and properties. If you've made it this far, then I'd say well done to you, because now you understand what's involved. And let me just say again, this is not easy, but the rewards are absolutely phenomenal. And if you're somebody that's prepared to put in the hard work, you can absolutely do amazing things in this business. And remember it as a stepping stone business. This is a thing that's going to help you build the foundation in terms of income to be able to go on and do bigger things. So let's quickly summarize those 7 steps. The first one is understanding your operating environment, knowing the area that you're going to work in, the rules and regulations that are there. Number 2 is making sure you get those figures right, so you understand what's involved in terms of the cost, the due diligence side that you need to do. Number 3 is going out and finding the properties, looking at the right type of properties, doing the negotiations with the landlords, with the agents maybe, to find those deals. Then number 4 is making sure you've got the right type of contracts and paperwork in place to ensure that you're getting the property in a legal and compliant way for you to be able to operate it in the way you need to. And then our 5th step is about the costs. Really understanding the costs and what's involved is ultimately what's going to ensure that you stay being profitable. Step 6 is finding the best possible tenants that are going to cause the least amount of hassle and pay us the highest level of rents that we're looking for. And the 7th and final step is of course managing those properties, making sure that we're on top of the properties and the tenants as well, to ensure that we're providing a great service for them so that it runs as an effective and profitable business. If you found this content useful, then you are really going to like what we've got lined up next for you. Over here is another video that I have on rent to rent, which is in much more detail than what we've been talking about right now. But just before you go and watch that, make sure you click on my face just down here to subscribe to the channel, and look forward to seeing you on this video over here.